Hi folks, welcome to this quick tutorial on this particular tutorial is going to focus on the Term 2 mark sheets for English and basically matching up the profiles with what you see on the mark sheet, as well as explaining what you're actually looking at in the profiles. And I think the best place to start here is in SASAMS itself. Okay, so if you were to open up the mark sheet in SASAMS itself, what you would see is you've got a prepared reading, which forms a part of the task 1 oral, and really oral is sort of the thing in this whole procedure that can be quite confusing and misleading to folks, and so we'll go through. It's going to have specific focus on that, and we'll show you what is actually happening in these SASAMS mark sheets and the way these marks carry over. So that is an activity, and the mark is out of 10 and is converted to a mark out of 10, which forms a part of that task. Now this is term 1. Okay, we're not too worried about the rest of this. We're looking only at the task mark, only at the oral mark in term 1. So take for instance this first learner here got 7. If we go to term 2, we'll see that mark carries over into the term 2 mark sheet. However, I'm going to show you how these term 1 oral marks don't actually count in the term 2 mark itself. What happens here is that the term 1 and term 2 oral mark are collected together and converted to a mark and held almost in reserve for the end of the year, and that is why you'll see that the weighting for these 2 oral marks that are collected together is actually 0. Okay, so what that's telling you is that this mark does not actually count for term 2. So you'll see here that the weighting for the respective tasks within term 2 is 30, 30, and 40. Right, so it's those 3 sections here. Right, task oral 2, which is the term 2 oral, it's got nothing to do with term 1. Task 5 and task 6, which are weighted 30, 30, and 40, are the marks that are actually going to count for the term mark for term 2. So actually, as I say, you can see these marks automatically carried over from term 1. Now, if I enter marks in here, alright, let's just enter some dummy marks in here. Now you'll see as I enter those marks, they jump over into this column here. Okay, and what that actually does is it puts these 2 marks together, and it actually converts it to a mark out of 30. So you can see this mark is out of 30. They're each out of 10, the oral marks. 7 and 6 is 13, but there's an 18 reflected there. That's because it's taken the 7 and 6, which is 13, out of a total of 20 and converted it to a mark out of 30. Now, this is actually irrelevant. It's actually irrelevant specifically for this term 2. It's this mark that gets carried over to term 4, and I'll show you what I mean in time. But you'll also notice that this mark has now carried over into one of the sub-tasks, if you like. So in other words, one of the activities within task 6. So you've got 3 activities within task 6 for term 2, and this mark carries over into that task. Now this is where it's kind of odd. I'm not even sure why they actually put it into this task 6 activity, because you'll see that it is weighted naught. Okay, so these weightings here in yellow, which is often what you're seeing on your mark sheets, and which is why some people have been getting confused, is these weightings in yellow have got nothing to do with the final term 2 mark. Okay, not directly anyway. These weightings in yellow are the contribution weighting of these tests towards the task mark, which ultimately then is weighted to get to the term 2 mark. And so you'll recall that the term 1 and term 2 oral, which is combined as a task P1, they call it oral, in other words, semester 1, for want of a better word, the first half of the year. Okay, although it gets combined there and carries over into these 3 activities, it is weighted naught again within these 3 activities. So actually this mark here for task 6, you will see, is only made up of these 2 activities. You can see that 24 and 21 is a mark of 45 out of 70. So to show you specifically what I mean, if you look at this 24, it's out of 40, and it's weighted as a percentage of the final task 6 mark. It's weighted as a percentage of 40. So even though, sorry, earlier I said these make up the contribution weightings for the task, not actually the contribution mark, because that's out of 40 and that's out of 30. That's out of a lower amount, but they value this, writing an essay double what they do the comprehension. They weight at 60, and you'll see what I mean. So they get 24 out of 40. Okay, 24 out of 40. All right, let me just clear the memory and multiply that by 40. Okay, that's the weighting for that test. So that stores a value of 24. Okay, so we'll store that in the memory. Now the next test is 21 out of 30. Okay, so you would normally think that that's 45 out of 70, which is going to give you a mark of, say, 63, somewhere around there, because a mark out of 24 out of 40 would seem to be more important, because that's out of 40 and that's out of 30. So if they use the mark contributions as the weightings, this 24, which is 60%, will pull the mark down, whereas 21 out of 30 is 70%. But you'll see that it doesn't, because although this is out of 40 and the mark contribution is greater, they weight it lower than they do this. Okay, and we'll show that now. So 21 divided by 30, but multiplied by 60, okay, gives you the contribution of 42. And if you add that to the stored value from the previous test, you get 66, which is exactly what you see here in this final task mark for task 6. And so you can see that this oral mark once again doesn't actually count. So in actual fact, that all these marks aren't actually counting at all for term 2, and I'll show you that again now when I add these final marks in. Right, so let's take this first learner here. Okay, so for the first task he ended up with 6 out of 10. So 6 divided by 10. Okay, let's just clear the memory, sorry. Alright. Multiplied by the weighting of 30 for that task. Okay. Equals 18. And stored value. Okay, and we go to the next task, which was 27 out of 45. Okay, so 27 out of 45, and that task 5 is weighted as 30. Okay, and we put that in our stored value. Okay, now as I say, this entire task is weighted 0, so it doesn't count. So this final task was 66 out of 100 divided by, multiplied by the final task weighting is 40. Okay, and we add that to our stored value. Okay, and bring up our value, which is 62.4, and there you can see that is the term 2 mark. So you can see that the term 2 mark is not made up of term 1 oral at all, although the term 1 oral is pulled through onto this mark sheet, and it stores a value because it is going to use that later on in the year. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take you through one more mark set, just so we can have another example of what we just did. Okay, let's memory clear that. What I did do is I saved this mark sheet, the marks that we were entering, and I came back into it. And you can actually see it now highlights in yellow, and it tells you activity marks copied from task. In other words, these are activity marks that have come from previous tasks. Okay, and you know that by virtue of the fact that that came from the oral task in term 1, that came from the oral task in term 2, alright, and they combined to give you a task mark, and that task mark then copied itself into another activity, which, as I say, as we discussed, formed part of term 6. Well, did but didn't, given the fact that it's weighted 0, and still not sure why it feels that they have to have it jump into that activity column, as this is the task mark that they carry through at the end of the year. Anyway, so you'll see why this is relevant when I show you the front office mark sheet. But so let's just go through one more mark set just so you can see how it works again. So again, this learner got 10 out of 10 for that task, so 10 out of 10, and that task is weighted 30. Okay, weighted 30, so multiplied by 30 and store it. Okay, check yes. Okay, and then the next one, he got or she 41 out of 45. 41 divided by 45 multiplied by 30. Okay, store the value, and the final test got 95 divided by 100 multiplied by the weighting of that task equals that. Store the value, and the final mark is 95.33, which is exactly what you can use. So you can see that that is exactly how it's worked out, and the explanation I've given is 100% correct. Now let's just see what this means for the term 2 mark sheets in front office. Now you'll recall that I mentioned that these activities they appear as activities, okay, even though they're actually marks that have come from previous tasks. Now you'll recall again that in my explanation of the mark sheets produced by front office that we had it so that wherever there was an activity within a task, okay, only the activities would show and not the task column 2. In other words, the column where a calculation takes place, we wouldn't show because we didn't want people to be confused. We only wanted columns to appear where marks needed to be entered. Okay, and this works across the board for all the subjects except for one small glitch at the moment, and it's not a major deal. There's a simple workaround, but it just means that these activities here, where we get the activities to show, are jumping onto our mark sheets as if there are activities where marks need to be captured, but actually they're not. Okay, you can see here that they're activities where marks have come from other locations. So the general rule of thumb here is that if it's weighted 0, you're not going to capture anything into that column because it doesn't count at the moment anyway. Right, at the end of the year, when this mark here is needed, that'll be captured into the relevant column at the end of the year. Now what we're going to do is Carl and I are going to search for the spot in the tables where it actually tells SAMS flags these columns. There'll be something that they get to flag these columns, to tell it that they are actually activities that have come from elsewhere, and we will then create an exclusion based on that, and these columns in future will then be held off the mark sheet, so that we'll stick to our policy of only columns where marks need to be entered will appear on the mark sheet. Now okay, so you'll see this in action actually, where you see this task here has got 2 activities within it, okay, and you'll see that that is these 2 activities here, okay, and it has got, only the columns where marks need to be entered for the teacher are appearing on the mark sheets, again to make it simpler for them to understand. So as I say, and I'm going to show you something else now that you can do, but as I say, to make this sort of fairly simpler, you can say that if the weighting is 0, then don't capture anything into the column, and then for this column where the weighting isn't 0, one can see that this is oral 2 task P1, okay, so it's oral 2 which has already been captured in this column over here that says oral 2, okay, so where the second time it says oral 2, don't capture in. Now there's another way that we can get this mark sheet to come up to kind of not hide these columns, but almost show them to be somewhere where nothing is captured. Right, so you've got these mark sheet templates in your mark sheets folder. Now this is where you control the format of the formatting of the mark sheets that get produced. Now one thing you can do is that before you can produce all your mark sheets, and then for the English mark sheets you can create a different template. Okay, so open the template. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I suggest what you do first is make a copy of your template first. Okay. Right, so you've got your generic template saved as a copy. So you can always jump back to that one. Okay, and then open your actual template that gets used. Okay, so once you have your mark sheet template open, you'll recall that the columns in question where there were no marks that needed to be entered were the 3rd, 4th and 5th tasks. I forgot to point that out when I was actually demoing, but you'll see that those were the columns involved. Okay, so all I'm going to do quite simply is make some alterations on the template, which is fully formatable. Okay, so we go format cells. Okay, and I'm going to say, I'm going to take away, oh gosh, take away all the borders. Okay, we can leave the top ones, I guess. And let's fill it, say red. Okay. Okay, so first of all, visually, one can tell that nothing is technically supposed to be entered there. But then what we can do is we can actually lock those cells as well. And because the mark sheet goes through in protected mode, the protection will automatically occur. So you you highlight that section, you click right click and choose format cells, you choose the protection tab and you click locked and you say okay. Alright, okay, then what you can do is you close this and save it. Okay, then what you can do is you can, well, I'll show you firstly in a one-off scenario. Okay, so we'll get one English mark sheet in. Select a term first. Okay, and we'll go and have a look at that mark sheet and how it's come out. Term 2, phase 3. Oops, I chose term 1 instead of term 2, beg your pardon, term 2. Okay, so term 2. We'll have a look at the mark sheet it's created. Right, and you will notice that you can't capture anything in these cells. So that's one way of preventing anything from being captured in the cells. So staff will know that only the cells that are open are the cells that they capture in. Now, just as a quick tip, if you want to avoid doing each of the English, say, mark sheets, you know, each class one by one, what you can do, okay, is you can make in your folder where your mark sheets exist, okay, make a new folder just so you can do this. Okay, so let's say mark sheets English. Okay. Oh, my computer memory is being eaten by my screen capturing software. Okay, so what I would do is I would grab this template that you just made. Okay. Copy it. Go to your mark sheets English. Okay, remember it's always looking for a folder called mark sheets, so you got to make a folder called mark sheets. Okay. And just put your template, your English template in there. Okay. Okay, then what I would do is I would go back to your mark sheets folder and just put rename your normal template, because remember we made a copy of it. Okay. Okay, so let's just get rid of the one that's for English. Then all you have to do is switch your Marksheet manager, the pathway in your Marksheet manager when you jump between creating normal Marksheets and, say, English Marksheets, or should I say home language Marksheets, because this will apply to Afrikaans as well. Okay, so that's your normal regular Marksheets template. Okay, now remember when you go and create Marksheets and it goes and creates them all by batch, what you're going to do, so for English, alright, so we're going to change this pathway here so that it's, see it says Marksheets English on the end, so it goes and looks for the Marksheets folder in that. Okay, then if you created these by batch, and I'm not going to do it now because it takes a while on my machine because I'm recording at the same time, so the memory's low, but if you, what it'll do is it'll create all of them, right? So you can then just go into your Marksheets. It'll create in this folder here, Marksheets, English Marksheets. It'll create your your term 2, phase 1, 2, 3, 4. You can go in there and just delete all the other classes and leave the English ones in there. So that may be quicker doing it that way around, especially if you have to redo them. Because perhaps they might want to add an activity, and that's another point I want to come to. And then if you want to do the rest of your school, the rest of them, you just backspace that Marksheets English bit out and then run the rest of them, and they'll all save in the other Marksheets folder, basically the general Marksheets folder, for want of a better word. Now, I was going through this with a school the other day as a sort of mock run, and they had expressed, for instance, that a couple of schools have that in term 2, for instance, their value they place on oral is higher, okay, than the 10 marks that we see were allocated to your term 2 oral. And so, well, in this case, adding activities and adding tasks is actually not a problem. So, folks, I realized I was working on my wrong screen when doing that particular section, so it wouldn't have been able to be seen. Essentially what I did was I added an activity for term 2, section 12.3.11. Okay, for term 2. Alright, so I clicked on that, I said edit task, okay. And I clicked on not used, and I clicked over here and I said maintain tasks and activities, and I said add activity. Okay, and I typed in prepared reading for description, prepared reading for vernacular, and I put the total marks on, and I gave it a task date, okay. And then I clicked maintain dates, marks, weights, and I changed that to 10, that to 15, and that to 15. And there's a button that comes up that says auto calculate. I click that, and that adjusts the weights to be 50-50 for those 2 tests. And then I click save and done, and then I go to the raw score and change that from 10 to 30, okay, so that now I was sitting with 2 activities for that particular oral instead of 1, okay. And I then went to the mark sheet itself in SASAMS, so that you can actually see that it's created a second activity for that particular oral task, okay, and it's made the total out of 30. Each of them is weighted evenly for that, and obviously the weighting for that task remains at 30, okay. And you will see that if you go to your Marksheet manager in FrontOFFICE and you produce that Marksheet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into the English Marksheet like I showed you. So I'm going to go to that particular location, English Marksheets. Okay, so my Marksheets folder is in my Marksheets English folder. Okay, so I'm going to copy that address. I'm going to backspace out this entire address. Copy the new address in. I'm going to choose English 7. Okay. Okay, those are created. Term 2, phase 3, And we see the mark sheet has been calculated, and this time it now has a mark sheet has been arrived at, sorry, and this time it now has the extra column activity that we've just added. Right, folks, that concludes this tutorial. What we'll do is I will be making further tutorials on generating formulas for Term 2. Well, I'll be putting them into the formula sheet, should I say. I'll make one tutorial glossing over them once again, briefly. But what I'm going to do is I'll do some of the salient ones, or some of them that are possibly vary a lot from Term 1. But in essence, now they all carry the same formulation of the formula, the same methodology in terms of working them out and what they should be. So we should be able to infer from the Term 1 formula I created along with the tutorials I made for that. We should be able to infer the Term 2 formula, but as I say, I'll do some of the salient ones. I'm not going to do them all for all the phases and all the grades again for Term 2, because you'll be able to extrapolate with all the information we now have at hand to do the more regular ones, the ones that tend to follow the same pattern in a sense. I will look for irregularities as well and include those, or where people have added tasks and activities to their data sets, but I think you'll start to get an idea of how the formula are put together. Okay, that concludes this tutorial on the makeup of the home language, and in many instances first language as well. Some of the phases. I did choose incidentally phase 3, grade 7, which tends to be in phase 3 is in high schools and grade 7 is in juniors, so it's both junior and high. But this is also the case for the other phases as well. So it's relevant for everyone. Thank you. Bye.